You may have heard this idea that walking is the best form of exercise. And while we actually disagree with that, there's a lot of benefits that can come from walking. But what if going for a walk just isn't working for your body? It's bugging your feet, it's bugging your knees, it's bugging your hips. And you're like, I know that I should be walking, I know that I should be up and moving around, but it's not feeling good for me. How should you think about structuring your exercise so you can get back to walking and being active on a consistent basis? On this week's episode of the Exercises Health Podcast is exactly what we're going to be diving into. We're going to cue our introduction and we're going to dive right into this conversation. Hey, welcome back, exercisers, to the Exercise is Health Podcast, brought to you by Exercise for Life Studios, where we believe that your health is your most valuable asset. And the single best thing that you can do to both boost and protect this asset is exercise. Specifically, exercise that's geared towards building the health and function of your muscles. We are your hosts, Charlie
and Julie.
And today we want to dive into this idea of walking and what you should be doing if walking just flat out isn't working for your body. Because we've heard time and time again just how beneficial walking can be. And whilst there are a lot of benefits that can come from walking, the whole notion of walking being the best exercise and everything like that often puts a lot of weight and a lot of emphasis in people's minds of like, oh, I need to start walking. But sometimes walking just isn't working for your body. So what should you do in that case? Well, that's exactly what we want to discuss with you on this week's episode. But before we do, we have an ask for you. And that ask is, if you've enjoyed any of our podcasts ever over the last 5.5 years, and we've been putting them out every single week, if you can just pause this one right here and now, scroll down on Apple Podcasts or click the link in the description to go to Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and review. Not only will it help more people find our podcast and allow this message to spread, it will allow us to show up higher on the podcast rankings, which is really important when it comes to getting on really high quality guests. So if you are enjoying the guests that we're bringing on, you want us to be able to continue to bring on really high quality guests, we would love if you just took a moment right now and left us a 5-star rating and review. So again, this week we are diving into this idea of what to do when walking isn't working for your body. And Julie, I gotta be honest with you, I feel like more times than not, at least with a lot of the people that we work with, walking isn't working for their body. So we want to talk about that.
Yeah, I think there's a couple signs to know that walking isn't working for your body, or it's becoming a stressor to your body. And some of those signs are going to be some joint pain, muscle pain, or like, hey, I'm doing this walking thing and I have to add more and more and more things in, meaning I have to do this pre-stretch thing. I have to go get specialized shoes. I have to do this structured thingy, or else I feel bad. So if you feel like that's you, then you got to listen up, because I hope that this podcast is going to really bring some light and direction on like, where should I go if walking isn't working? So I think the first thing to acknowledge is like, hey, if you're trying to walk, yay.
Yes.
We're so happy.
Yes.
Because the reason that the idea goes around that walking is the best form of exercise is because walking is something that keeps people active, and it's relatively easy. I mean, everyone can walk around their house. On terrible days, I've walked around my house when it's like icky outside and I don't want to go outside and slip and fall or something. Everyone has an outside to their house. They can go walk there. All you really need is shoes, and you don't even need any kind of special equipment. So that's why a lot of times the idea of walking is the best form of exercise gets put out there. But the actual thing that walking does that is amazing, which doesn't need to have walking included at all, is that you're consistently active and you're moving. And so if that for you means walking, great. If that for you means riding your bike, then great. If that for you means you find ways to just move around your day, or you're just active at work, that fills that bucket of being active throughout your day, or doing something that is easy, you're not having to overthink. So always remember that, first of all. So you can take that and run with it and think of all the things that you like to do that don't bother your joints or don't bother your muscles, or you don't need an hour pre-stretch idea thing before it, because we don't want to be doing activities that are negatively stressing our bodies. We want to be doing activities that are positively stressing our bodies, or we like to use a word like stimulating it so that it will grow and get better and get healthier and get stronger. That's what we're looking for from exercise. But unfortunately, there's so much weight put on walking because it's like walking is the best form of exercise. But if you remember, it's all about the activity, but we're going to troubleshoot some things if you are thinking, well, I do kind of want to walk, and how to kind of overcome this idea if walking isn't working for your body.
Yeah, Julia, that's a really big point. This idea that, okay, when we hear, okay, you need to be walking, you need to get in your 10,000 steps or every single day or whatever. And then this picture pops into people's minds of how they need to go about doing it. It's a 3-mile walk in the morning, it's another 3 miles in the evening and everything like that. And they're going to close their rings for the day and all that stuff. And then when their days don't match up to that picture because trying to complete that picture is actually feeling really stressful for their body, then a lot of issues come up, because then if it almost feels like, well, I just can't do it at all. But to your point, the point is not to close the rings. The point is not to get the 10,000 steps. The point is to be consistently moving throughout your day. And there are a lot of ways to do that don't necessarily involve walking or don't rely as heavily on just straight walking. Okay. So if you're feeling like, okay, but I need to be, active throughout my day. Yes, but that does not mean that you need to be walking. We've covered this topic in a number of other podcasts. And so if you're looking for ideas of, okay, well, how do I be active without walking? We've definitely touched on that in the past. What we want to talk about today is, if you want to make sure that you're able to keep walking, how do you go about doing that in ways that aren't as stressful for your body?
Spoiler alert. These tips apply to any activity that you do a lot of. Mm-hmm. So let's say you're a swimmer and you're like, I want to keep swimming, but it hurts my shoulders. Or you're a jogger. You're like, I want to keep jogging, but it hurts my calves or my shins or my knees or whatever. I'm a biker. So these tips are going to apply to any activity that is like one of those, that is a very repetitive activity. So if you think about walking in your head, think about the motion of walking. You do the same motion 10,000 times, right? And so it's this repetitive motion. The big thing that we want to emphasize is that the thing that is likely failing you is your muscle strength. And you might be hearing that and thinking, well, yeah, that's why I'm walking. I'm trying to get stronger. Well, the most efficient way to get stronger is to do resistance training. That is like the most direct way to strengthen your muscles and all of your muscles, and in a full way. So remember, walking is a very repetitive motion. You're doing the same motion over and over again, and it's like the same range. Like if you think about your walk, on average, you take like about the same length of a step, right? So the muscles that control that small range are going to get stronger, or just used a lot. And so we have to complement this with times when you're saying, hey, I'm just going to work on my knee strength. I'm going to work on my hip strength. I'm going to work on my foot strength. And it's not the type of strength where it's like the push through mental emotional strength, or the, strong-willed strength, or the determined strength. It's not that type of strength. It's actually physical muscle strength. And those don't get stronger unless you're working on them, like physically in the gym or at your home. But you need to be working on your resistance training to build the strength of your muscles so that your muscles and your joints will be more supported, so you can do stuff like walking without negative repercussions.
Now, I just want to highlight what you said early on, because it was such a key point. You're saying if your body feels like it's failing you in some way, meaning like the walking is feeling stressful for your body, it's not working for your body, your feet are hurting, your knees are hurting, your hips are hurting, your back is hurting, something about that activity is not holding up well for your body. You said that is a telltale sign that your strength is failing, that your strength relative to that activity, the volume that you're doing it, the duration that you're doing it, your muscles are not strong enough. Your muscles are failing you in that realm. That is a huge point, because think about what we often try to do if we're going for a walk and our feet start bugging us. What's one of the first things that a lot of people think of? Oh, well, I need more support in my shoes, right? I need something external or artificial to support my body. Well, what's the thing that's supposed to be supporting your body? What's the thing that's supposed to be supporting your feet? Those are your muscles. And so if you're feeling, well, I need this extra bolster, I need this extra brace, I need this external support, this artificial stability in order to make it more comfortable, that should in your head start setting off these ding, ding, dings like, oh, wow, yeah, now this is my body's way of telling me that my muscles are not strong enough. If you're feeling like, oh, well, I need to wear this knee brace, or I need to have some kind of support for my back or anything like that to be able to operate throughout my day to do these activities, that is a sign that the things that are supposed to be supporting your body, your muscles, are not doing their job well enough. They're not functioning well enough. They're not strong enough. And as such, you're needing to include this external support. That's it. That's a huge, huge point that so often goes overlooked.
And to add to that, Charlie, I think that it's interesting and just kind of, I don't know, to us it seems so foreign, but when we talk to the general population that's not thinking about muscles and exercise all the time, that is actually a normal thought.
Right.
Because a lot of us think that our muscles are going to stay strong as long as I'm generally active. And most of the time they do, and sometimes they do. But everyone reaches a time in their life where their strength starts to dip lower than what they'd like to do with their life. And if you're experiencing signs and symptoms when you're trying to be active, when you're grocery shopping, when you're lifting your grandkids, that is a sign that your muscle strength is now dipping lower than your activity interests, right? And so you have a choice here. You can either continue on the natural path. The natural normal path is that we will lose muscle strength, lose bone density, lose joint function. And so we can just say, yeah, that's part of life. And it is just part of life. But now we know that when we do strength training, that we can actually start negating a lot of those things. And what is really cool about this is that you're going to be able to do more things without symptoms, right? So adding in this resistance training is going to be like the internal support system that you're trying to get from braces or stretching or from all the other things that you're trying to add in. Additionally, you'll be able to do more activities with your life. So it is normal for us to lose muscle strength and bone strength and our ability to do activities because of these things. But we also have the opportunity to start working on these things, and it makes a much larger impact than you might even imagine, especially if you've never done resistance training. I think a lot of people think, oh, well, resistance training is for people that want big muscles. Resistance training is actually for people that want to be able to do the things they want in their life with less restrictions.
Yes, absolutely. Now, there are 4 kind of key areas of your body that you're really going to want to focus on when it comes to doing your strength training, right? The first is what we've touched on quite a bit already, is your feet, okay? Your feet house nearly 20% of your body's skeletal muscles. Like, that's crazy. We normally think of our feet as just kind of this one thing, but your feet have so many bones, so many joints, so many muscles, and you have your plantar fascia and a whole bunch of other fascia and everything like that. And it's the strength and the function of your muscles that supports all of that. And so the stronger your feet are, not only the more supported your feet will be, but what we see is everything else going up your body, your ankles, your knees, and I would even throw kind of your ankles and feet together. A lot of times we kind of think of that. So we'll say like your knees, your hips, your low back, even up into like your mid back, shoulders, and neck, literally all the way up your body gets better supported. So doing exercises to strengthen the muscles of your feet is a really key component of making sure that your body is strong enough, that your muscles are strong enough and functioning well enough in order to be able to do this walking thing.
Going up the chain, the next joint you get to after your feet and ankles is your knees. And your knees are one of the most, I feel like, interesting joints because so many people have symptoms in their knees. A lot of people never strengthen their knees, but a lot of times they kind of take the brunt of what's going on in your ankles and your hips. So that's why it's important to do all 4. But it's important to strengthen your knees. Your knees do a bending motion and your knees do a straightening motion. And so when you're in the gym, when you're exercising, thinking about doing exercises that really challenge your ability to bend your knee and challenge your ability to straighten your knee, so that you can really get a good stimulus, a good strengthening to the knee muscles. We call them like the quads and the hamstrings, if you're familiar with those types of words. But making sure that knee joint stays really, really strong, because again, a lot of times it is kind of like the brunt of all the force that a lot of people have with their lower body.
Absolutely. And then the third area you want to consider are your hips. Now, your hips move in a whole bunch of directions, forward, back, side to side, spinning in and out. And I would say from a walking perspective, like a lot of people focus on kind of the forward back because that's what we really think of when we think of the walking motion. And sure, you want to make sure that you have strong glutes, which is going to be the backwards motion. You want to make sure that, your hip flexors are strong, which is going to be the forward motion. But I think a lot of times what goes neglected, especially from a pure strength standpoint, is kind of the in and out, the what we call hip adduction or bringing the legs together, and the hip abduction or the bringing the legs apart. So the kind of inner thigh work and the outer thigh work. Now, this often gets added in, or sometimes gets added in as kind of like a secondary or I'll say like a tertiary aspect of some exercise programs, meaning like, oh, we're doing, squats and hitting like the outer part of the hips, or, we are doing, this type of lunge or whatever, and we're hitting the inner thigh with that. That's kind of what gets said. But what we're talking about is actually like specific exercises where you're challenging your legs going in and where you're challenging your legs going apart to really try to target those muscles better. I tell you, the stronger we get those areas, those hip adductors and the hip abductors, a lot of times not only does that help support the knees better, but it really allows people to walk with greater ease and greater efficiency.
Yeah, I think that point, that probably would be the most important one that not the most important one, but the most left out one.
Yes.
I think.
Yeah.
And a lot of times when people have weak feet, they've supported in some way to not feel that sensation, but it's very hard to support the hips at the in and out without actually doing the exercise. So make sure you do those exercises. The last area is going to be your core. And your core is so important because it's where your hips meet. If you think like your legs go up, they meet at one spot, which is your core, your abs, your back, your side benders. So when you think about training your core, you want to think about training it in all the directions that it does. And a lot of times we think about the ones that we're familiar with or the ones that we know or we are comfortable with, but it's important to be doing all four, because if you're not doing all four core motions, you're leaving a motion up for vulnerability, whether you feel that when you're walking or you feel it when you're doing something else. We want to make sure that you have a well-rounded core. So we want to think about challenging your forward motion, your back motion, your side to side, and your twisting. So things like crunches, spine extensions, side bend exercises, and trunk rotation or core rotation exercises, and really making sure you're doing all of them, because you can't even imagine the amount of times I meet people. They're like, I do a lot of exercise, but I definitely don't do spine extensions because it hurts my back. So make sure you go back to some other episodes on the application of these exercises so that you can find a way to be strengthening every motion, because anytime you leave one out, you're leaving it out for vulnerability and for injury.
Absolutely. And Julie, I know just like with your history, you had a number of foot issues growing up, from a plantar fasciitis standpoint or whatever. And it wasn't really until you got your core muscles stronger and functioning better, especially kind of with a trunk rotation type motion, that the stress that your feet were picking up really started to get, to get relieved, and you were able to walk and function more normally. So this trunk part, it's not just like, oh, we work our abs so we look a certain way in a bathing suit or anything like that. It's like no. The core has such a systemic influence, not only from a what you do throughout your day, but from a motion or an activity like walking and stuff. And we talk about how the feet can help influence everything above it. Well, when your core is stronger and working better, it can help to relieve extra stress that your hips are taking on, that your knees are taking on, that your feet are taking on. So everything works in concert in this way. And so we want to make sure that you really are hitting these four different directions with your trunk. Again, crunches or not necessarily specifically crunches, but like the forward folding, like the what we call trunk flexion, the extension or going backwards, the side to side motion, which we call side bend, and then the trunk rotation, which is the twisting motion. And that will help to hit all the muscles of your core in a variety of ways.
So to recap the areas that we really need to focus on when it comes to walking, we're going to be thinking about feet and ankles, knees, hips, and our core, and making sure that we're hitting all of those areas and as well-rounded as we can. Now, a lot of times we want to be active, we want to be doing things, and we feel restricted because of, maybe a diagnosis or a pain or an issue that we're feeling, a joint problem. But always remember that no matter what you have going on, whether it is something you are working on in, physical therapy, you're working on at home, something you're not working on at all, being stronger is always better. Having more strong, more conditioned, more functional muscles and joints is always going to serve you better. So make sure you're getting in your strength training so that you're able to be as active as you want, or be more active than you otherwise would be had you not been as strong.
Absolutely. Now, if you're wondering, okay, well, how do I go about doing these exercises? Like, what exercises should I be doing? Like we've talked about, we have a lot of podcasts that we put out kind of giving you the specifics of how to go about doing different exercises. Our 4 Exercise for Life principles that we talk about a bunch. But within the Exercise for Life membership, we also have a number of programs that are geared towards this. Things like resistance training building blocks, things like the Strong and Stable program, which is really going to help to strengthen your feet. Core and cardio is going to make sure that, all directions of your core are worked appropriately and being able to get stronger with those. So if you're looking for, exercises that you can do at home that, Julie and I are guiding you through and making sure that you're strengthening your entire body from your, feet all the way up through your system so you can get back to walking or just doing activities throughout your day and feeling strong with it, then the Exercise for Life membership really is for you, okay? All you have to do to get started is go to www.exerciseforlifestudios.com/membership, and we'll put that link in the description below this video if you're watching on YouTube, as well as in the show notes if you're listening to the audio of this. But at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you are working those different areas of your body, like Julie's saying, your feet, your knees, your hips, and your trunk. And that's not to neglect your shoulders. That's not to neglect your arms or your neck or anything like that. But we're talking about, this activity that we feel like we should be doing, which is walking, for whatever reason it's not working for your body, making sure you're adding in strength training exercises for those 4 key areas, your feet, your knees, your hips, and your core, really can go a long way to helping to make sure that your body is functioning well enough that you can walk. I was going to say you actually can exercise, but you can walk. You can do the other activities in your life that you want to do. So who do you know that needs to hear this episode? Who do you know that is struggling to walk consistently because of how their body feels when they're doing it? Maybe it's bugging their feet or their knees or their hips or somewhere in their back or throughout their body. Share this episode with them so they can understand that a lot of times when your body's talking to you in those ways and is limiting you from being as active as you want to be, that is a sign that your muscles are not as strong as they need to be in order to do those activities. And while you're online, head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and review. It helps people find our podcast when they're looking for information on exercise and they're looking for information on health. So if you found value in this conversation today, let us know by leaving us a 5-star rating and review. Well, thanks so much for tuning in. We always appreciate it. Have a fantastic week, and we'll talk with you all next week. This podcast is for information purposes only. The statements and views on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Julie and Charlie Gates, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements or advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. If you think you have a medical issue, consult a licensed physician.